Okay, we are live. So welcome to Gemma Noonan, who is the Managing Director of the Gigs Group in Cambridgeshire. And thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon, or if you're watching at a later time and listening at a later time, thank you very much for joining me. So Gemma, thanks very much for giving up your lunchtime to spend with me and everybody else. I am very, very grateful. So how are you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thank you for having me. It's an honour to be asked.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So I have the pleasure of meeting you at the Women in the Estate Agency conference, which was absolutely exceptional, which we will come on and talk about
Yes.
shortly. But tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us your journey and your career, please.
Okay. My career journey in the early days, I left school probably like a lot of people with no clue at all about what I wanted to do or be. That was I did know, and so I did A levels, and I had an awareness that I preferred working to studying. So I'd done my A levels, and I was bored of sitting in classes and listening to teachers. And I had done a lot of work. I'd worked in restaurants and I'd worked in a shop, Boots the chemist on the pharmacy counter. And I'd really been kind of doing a bit of work since I was sort of 11. I'd mucked out horses in return for free rides, and just knew that I was more of a grafter than a studier. So didn't go to university, even though I could have done. But I was kind of at a bit of a loss, and I didn't really get any support from careers services. No one could really figure out, or really offer much advice. And I had a vague interest in fashion. Well, not a vague interest, but I had an interest in fashion. And so I wrote lots of letters to department stores, magazines. I got a lot of knockbacks, a lot of no, thank you very much, you're not old enough, you don't have a degree. And I got one reply from Harrods, the department store, who said, we've got this career training scheme, apply for it. So I did. And I think there were about 100 people applied for it. And I think about 5 or 6 of us got through and were given a year's placement working in various departments around the store. And that was amazing. It was hard work, and it was very formal, and there was a dress code, and it was like a real kind of bam into work introduction, but a great grounding. And I learned a lot about being professional and about customer service. And I was put into 2 departments, which was quite unusual. I was put in the training and development department, and I was put into the HR department. And that was quite an unusual thing to happen on that scheme. And it must have been fate. And I kind of believe in fate, because I realised actually I had no idea what HR was before then. But actually I had a real interest, or developed an interest in initially employment law and then people management, and decided, at least in the short term, that's what I wanted to do with my career. But I knew that I wanted to study as well. So having said I wasn't much of a studier, I always knew qualifications were important, and I always knew I would look for something where I was interested in doing the studying. So that was it. And Harrods wouldn't have supported someone at my age with my lack of experience doing a HR study. So I then looked for a job back in Cambridgeshire, which is where I had grown up. And I got a HR assistant job. So I did my HR assistant job and studied for 3 years to get my HR qualifications. So I was quite young. I was 23 and I was a HR manager, fully qualified. And I guess I did all of that because I didn't go to university, and I had all of that work experience. That was, for me, that was an amazing kind of introduction into the world of work. In a nutshell, I worked in various HR roles in software, tech companies, did a little bit in a law firm. And then I had an amazing 12 years at a company called MediaTek, who are Taiwanese semiconductor company. So technology, the design of microchips, hardware and software for all sorts of electronic devices. And that was incredible because I've traveled the world. I've been to Taiwan. I spent a lot of time in America. I actually spent 1 week, a month in America for a year, which was incredible. And I was doing that job, and I had worked my way up to HR director, when I started talking to Matt Giggs.
It can be persuasive, that, Mr. Giggs.
So that's, yeah. So I was doing that until I moved into this industry 3 years ago.
Okay, so loads of questions. Firstly, Rob Brady, thank you very much for your comment. Gemma Noonan, true legend. There you go.
Oh, thanks.
I don't know what you paid to get Rob to say that.
That's lovely. Thank you, Rob.
It's fine. So look, there's loads to unpick on all of that. And actually, I just want to start off when you first started and you got all those setbacks and you got all those no's, because there's a big lesson there. How did you overcome those?
Yeah, I think I guess it wasn't a shock, maybe. Maybe I kind of expected it. So I was kind of prepared, I guess. I wrote a lot of letters and I think I focused on the responses that I got. It's interesting because I actually applied for the John Lewis career scheme as well. And I went along to the selection day for that. And I just didn't feel like I fitted in with any of the other candidates that were there. And so I didn't pursue that one. So I think I've always had maybe good, like a bit of a sense for, and like I say, fate. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and just focus on what you can control.
Okay, I love that mindset. So where did that come from?
I honestly don't know. I've always been very grown up. Always, yeah, just been quite a mature person, I guess, in the sense of my outlook on life and study and, applied myself at school. I now know, because I've done a lot of work with values, that one of my values is achieve. So I've always kind of had that in me, that I wanted to focus. If I set myself a goal to achieve something, I genuinely do achieve something. So yeah, again, coming back to the, focus on what you can control and just keep going and, just take the knockbacks and, just keep going forwards.
Great. Well, there you go. Every no brings you closer to your yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you, Zenobia, for your comments. Appreciate it. And hopefully I've got your name right. And if not, I apologize. Okay. So working at Harrods, big prestigious company in Kensington. So what were the lessons that you learned there by going to the two different departments? And what did you do for them to see the potential that you were working in training and in HR?
Yeah, so I do you know what I worked in a few different departments, and two of them were HR and trade. So training was my first department. I went and worked in the homewares department. I worked in the bridal registry, where all the rich people came to have their gift registries. So that was insightful. And I just love talking to people. I love helping people, I think. So that helped me in those roles. It was, I was working in the home department, where I was answering emails from people who were in America spending thousands of pounds on Versace table. I mean, it was just crazy. I was 19. I was just like, this world is one that I don't understand, and I'm not sure I really fit into. But I like helping people. And so I just kind of rolled with it. And I was sent to the distribution centre, which is out like Sion, Osterley Park, kind of West London. That was interesting. So I was actually working in like the ticket office, where all the goods come through. So doing preferred supplier reports and looking, at which carriers they were using, and just completely random, jobs that you get given as a trainee. And it was there that they had a job come up in HR. And I just said, they knew that I'd done training. They were kind of, I was working out well in the ticket office. And they said, do you fancy it was a bit off of the training scheme at that point. I shouldn't really have gone into that department and that role. But I said, yeah, no, I'd love to. And they couldn't find someone to fill that role. And so I ended up at that point really never going back to the training scheme, and just spending the last 6 months of my year in the HR department working in HR. And ironically, I'd managed to bag myself a room in a house in Knightsbridge, but I ended up traveling to the other end of London, or the other end of West London, to work at the distribution centre. when otherwise it would have been a 5-minute walk to work. But again, you just get given an opportunity and something tells you that, that's what you need to do.
Fantastic. So you said you went to the States.
Yeah.
And what experience did you have there? What lessons did you learn from being in America, and how they do things?
Yeah, I love the American ethos of customer service, and the have a nice day, and just I met so many people and had so many experiences in restaurants and things that just I think I learned that if you're in the right job and you're happy in your job, it makes a massive difference. You can tell when someone is genuinely like happy to be there, happy to serve. I was very lucky. I worked with some amazing senior managers and a director who I learned a lot from, who was a HR director by accident, and kind of handed over a lot of what he had been doing to me, that kind of led me to becoming the director. And so I met some wonderful people, and just I've worked in different cultures. I've worked in the Taiwanese culture, I've worked in the US culture, I've worked in the British culture, and I've spent a lot of time in Finland and in Scandinavia. And it's, there are lots of similarities, but there are also differences. And I think it's important to recognize the differences and embrace the differences. Working in an international company and kind of recognizing that they want to do things differently in Finland to how they do in the UK. And that's good. And that should be, you should encourage that rather than trying to kind of homogenize everything.
So what have you used from any of your travels that you brought back to the UK that's worked really well for you?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think. Just, I don't know. I mean, so many companies have so many similarities. So I think sometimes it's just the culture of the company rather than the country. I think working in Scandinavia and working in Finland and the different culture in terms of working hours, in Finland's really interesting in that all of the kind of childcare is state run. So if you don't pick your child up by 5:30, you are in trouble. And so there's this great culture of kind of, you stop work and you go and pick your children up. And I just thought that was amazing, because I don't think we do that so well in this country, and I think our childcare works later. And, the Taiwanese cultures, the American cultures tend to be very hardworking, long hours. And I think, if you're then running the European offices for those countries, you have to try and balance that in terms of, what's right for our local culture, but also making sure that you recruit people that understand the parent company and the expectations, and always trying to find a good balance.
So you've spoken a lot about culture and values. I'm going to come back to values in a minute, but culture, how do you build the right culture in your business? There's going to be loads of estate agents watching this. There's going to be some that are just starting their career, some that are more established, maybe wanting to set up their own businesses. How do you establish the culture in your business, in your agency? In fact, there may be some that are watching now that think their culture is totally wrong and it needs to be changed. What are the steps you need to take in order to do that?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is what is culture? Because it's like this big word and it's this big kind of thing. But actually, for us, we really simplify it, which is it's the way that we do things around here. And I think if you want to have a strong workplace culture, you have to kind of almost be unapologetic about it. I was talking to someone recently who I was coaching, who said that she has very high standards and she finds it hard to recruit people that have the same standards. And I was saying, you have to hammer that through interview. Don't apologize for having high standards. Be very clear in the interview process that is you, and that, and this is what you expect. You will attract people who like that, and you will repel people who are put off by that. And that is, if you can do that in the recruitment process, much better to do it then than 6 months later. So, when you think of it in terms of, it's the way we do things around here, then it's about how we behave. And for us at the Gigs Group, it's been about being really clear about what our core values are, what is our mission and vision, and always trying to come back to that. So if we make decisions about hiring someone, sometimes we have to make a decision about firing someone, making decisions about opening a business, closing a business, going into a business partnership or not going into a business partnership. It's always got to be in line with those core values.
Okay, so how do you get your team to buy into those core values then? How do you get the right people in the right seats of a bus?
So I guess there's two answers to that question in the sense of the journey that we've been on. So in terms of recruiting for people with the right values, we have a process for that, which is connected to work that I do with another organisation. So I work with a Swedish company called Values Online, and they are or Point of Value, and their website is Values Online. And they have got a one in the world product, which is an online ranking system. And it allows you, in the same way that you might do a psychometric test with an interview candidate, it allows people to go online in about 20 minutes, rank what is important to them. So you can do lots of values tests online, but this one's really clever because it forces you to pick and to rank other values against each other. So you get to a point where you're really quite clear on what your core values are. So we do that ranking, and then I coach interview candidates through it. And I kind of see it as a bit of a gift, really, because and it works on a number of levels. One level is that if I explain that process to someone and they glaze over and they don't look interested, then I know they're not for us. Two, it's a good way of getting to know someone, because going through that coaching process is quite unusual in a recruitment process, but it allows us to see, really how self-aware is someone, because it's a storytelling process. So if I say that one of my values is being assertive, I'm looking for a story that demonstrates through my life why that is one of my values. And again, that's a lot kind of getting to know someone on a much deeper level than you typically will do in an interview process. So that's really helpful for us. In terms of the organisation and the people that we have in place already that haven't been through that recruitment process, we actually did it took us a year to do a series of values workshops. The Gigs Group is a number of small companies, and so we worked with each company and we did values workshops. So we went through the individual process. So they did their values rankings. Then each person did some storytelling, which was great team building. So they got to share what their values were with other people in the team. And then we looked at, as a team, working together. So if you're Assured Mortgage Advice or your Gigs and Company in St Neots, what are the values that are really important to you working together as a team? Then we were able to take the output of all of that teamwork and put it into, okay, so what's that telling us about what the Gigs Group values are? And then also so that's kind of bottom up, but then top down, what's Matt's values? Because it is the Gigs Group at the end of the day, and every business is owned, in part by Matt. So, what are Matt's values? And then how does that bottom up and top down connect? And therefore, what should our values be?
Okay, so I know you do a lot with DISC.
Yeah.
Would you like to explain to the audience what DISC is and how it helps you and how it helps your colleagues as well?
Yeah, so DISC, we haven't done a lot of DISC because we've been so focused on values, but DISC is brilliant in terms of, I think, just being aware that people are different. And that's what I love DISC for. So DISC is, if you imagine a square with 4 squares inside it, D, I, S, and C, there are 4 personality types. Some people might be familiar with DISC. People might be familiar with insights, which is colours, yellow, red, blue, green. And people might be familiar with Myers-Briggs, which is what the basis of like all of these behavioural programs comes from, the original kind of Myers-Briggs research. My brain cannot cope with Myers-Briggs and all the letters and things. So I'm just like, it's just too complicated for me. So DISC is really simple. There are 4 personality types according to behavioural science. And it's about understanding where you fit in that quadrant. And you can fit, in more than 1 quadrant, no more than 3. But you could be a D type person, you could be an I type person, an S type person. And what it's brilliant for is recognizing that we're all different. And we could have a conversation, Stephen, and not agree on something or not agree on the way forwards on something. Doesn't mean that either of us is wrong or a bad person. It just means that our brains work differently. We behave in a different way. And the other thing I love about it, when I understood that it takes a different amount of energy to do something that is not natural to your behaviors. So if you are what's the best example to give? So let's say you're a C type. So a C type person, very system focused, brilliant, at sitting in a room and figuring out a process and following a process. Now, if you ask a C type person to stand up in front of a room of 200 people and talk at an event, they're probably going to say no. And if they do say yes, they're going to need help, they're going to need coaching. And at the end of the day, they are going to be absolutely exhausted because they're so far out of their comfort zone. Whereas Matt, who is mostly an I-type person, will just take that stuff in his stride. And, it will take a lot less energy for Matt to do something like that than it will do for me. So it's just, for me as a people person and a HR person at heart, just having those kind of toolbox kits that, to help people to understand where they fit is really, useful. And about understand, it's not about people being good or bad at things or being good or bad people, or being, someone's just put in the comments, are they dominance, influence, steadiness and conscientiousness? And yes, that is what the DISC stands for. But actually, I try not to use those because people don't like to be called dominant, or they don't necessarily like to be thought of as being dominant. I'm heavily S, and, people say, oh, she's steady. Am I? Labels, so yes, that is what DISC stands for. But it's more about just understanding that there are different spectrums and we all have a place, and it's just about working together and understanding why people react or behave in different ways to you.
Okay, lovely. And Daniel, thanks very much for your question. And thanks for watching. Appreciate it. So coming back to recruitment, I know that finding the right people, getting the right people in the right seats is a challenge for most business owners. Are there any great questions? I know obviously you talked about that specific profiling that you use, and the ranking system. Are there any great questions before you go to that, or would you go straight to the ranking system and ask people to rank themselves and then the questions come from there? How does that work?
For me, before I did the value stuff, I always enjoy in an interview exploring someone's CV, and a bit like we are today, okay, so tell me about, you left school, what did you do? Why did you decide to do that? Because I think the journey that people have been on tells you a lot more maybe than some of the jobs that they've done. So I like to explore people's CVs, their backgrounds. I like to ask people why they do a certain job or why they've done certain jobs. And I like to challenge people a bit on that as well, because quite often people will say, I do it for my family, I do it for my kids, whatever. And I think you work and you want to have a certain standard of living and a certain income for your family, but I don't think that's why you do a particular job that you do. So I like to drill down and press people a little in understanding, but why do you choose to do that through a state agency or through administration or whatever, to really understand, because I think most of us have a vocation and something that can be something we enjoy doing that doesn't feel like a job. And I would prefer to hire people into a role where that is the case.
Okay, so have you got a favourite question that you ask?
It's probably that why are you, and I interviewed someone yesterday and I asked that exact, question. He talked a lot about estate agency, but it's like, but why are you an estate, you've talked about sales and you've talked about that, but why estate agency? So yeah, I love in estate, in any field of work, why do you do this?
Great question. Okay, so you do a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
What does a great coach look like in Gemma's world?
The best coaches that I've worked with and been taught by are great listeners. So for me, coaching is about two things. It's about listening and it's about asking questions. I think there's lots of different versions of a coach, a mentor, whether you're on the side of kind of someone that is prescriptive and is saying, these are the things that I've done to be successful and these are the things that you should do. I would say I'm a people focused coach, what is right for the person, understanding what they need. Giving them, if they ask for my advice. But I think, when you learn to be an executive coach, that's absolutely something you should steer clear of. You're there to facilitate someone's journey in exploring an issue or planning for something. You're not really there to advise people in the purest sense of coaching. And that's kind of, what I believe. So I remember having this conversation when I joined the gigs group and was doing more of a coaching focused role initially. It's kind of like, I don't need to be an estate agent to coach you as estate agents. What I need to do is listen, ask you questions, understand what you're trying to achieve, and then kind of, help you break that down and help you to be accountable for what you want to achieve.
Okay, so perfectly led on to my next question, accountability. So how do you get people to be accountable and implement stuff? Because there's loads of exceptional people out there. They go on courses and either they become self-developers or they become shelf developers and just everything goes on the shelf and that's it. Yeah. So how do you actually get people to take action? Because I think the top 5% of people are the ones that take action and are accountable and implement stuff. What do you do when they're struggling?
I think you have to remind people it's that why question again. Why are you doing it? Why did you want to do that? What are you trying to achieve? And remind them, if they're not getting closer to achieving that end point, that they're not. Do they need to reset? Was the goal not the right one? And kind of bring people back around. When I run training courses, and I learned this from a wonderful lady who I remember her name was Susanna, and I'll always remember her. She was a training facilitator, one of the best I've ever seen. And she set our expectations at the beginning of a training course. We were doing a day's communication skills training. And she said, guys, if you leave here today and change one thing, then this training was a worthwhile experience and a worthwhile investment for you. And that's always stuck with me. There's no point going to 5 days of training and thinking you're going to change your life and change your world. It's just not realistic. It might be, and I know, the Tony Robbins events, there are some amazing things out there, but they take very driven people to go away and be able to implement 1,000 new things that they've learned. So I always think, just take it one step at a time. What is it this week that you're going to change, the habits that you're going to build up, so that they become habits, and so that it's not just this daunting task. I think so for me, I think most people that don't hold themselves accountable, they didn't want it enough to put in the hard work or whatever it is that's needed. They either didn't want it enough, or they've just bitten off too much than they can chew. And I think a coach's role can be great if you can help them to kind of break it down into, okay, what's realistic for you now to change that is one step towards that end goal.
Brilliant. Thank you. So Spencer Lawrence asked a fantastic question. So thanks for watching, Spencer. Appreciate it. And can you give me a call after? I've got something to ask you. Best ways to coach people to become better listeners, something we are not trained to do.
Yeah. Hi, Spencer. There's a great exercise, and I do this in workshops. So you need two people. And if you sit and listen, it's basically two people, one listening and one talking. 5 minutes, sit and listen to the other person without saying a word. You can nod, you can smile, you can laugh, you can pull a face if they're saying, you can react to them. And that's really good, actually, because your reactions are showing that you're actively listening. But do that and don't speak for 5 minutes, and do it. Like, don't do it for 2 minutes, do it for 5 minutes. And when I was learning to coach and be a coach, I did that exercise, and I did lots of other kind of live coaching training, and that it was just mind blowing for me. That kind of I'm a talker, and so I probably prior to that would have asked too many questions and filled too many awkward silences. So there's something about learning to just be present in the moment, actively listen, and don't try to fill awkward silences. Because if you're managing someone and you've asked them a question, you need to let them tell you. And they might take them a little while of going around the houses to actually respond to your question. And every time you ask a question, you are changing where they're going and where their thought process is going. So actually you need, if you can be aware of that and you can remember that, you just need to spend more time listening.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
No, definitely. I remember when I was a member of Vistage, and hopefully I'll get this right because it was a long, long time ago. There was 16 people in the room, and we got given a piece of paper, and the first person had to go outside with somebody, and he had to read what was on that piece of paper. That person then had to listen, okay, and then the next person would come out, and then it would carry on. And then at the end, the last person would tell the story of what hopefully was written at the start. Yeah. Well, you can imagine it was totally
different by the end. Yeah, absolutely. That's that's another great example. The other thing with what's interesting, and I learned this again when I was learning to be a coach, is about not taking too many notes. I was someone that would sit and, a wonderful lady called Jane, who I went on my coaching journey with and is a master and coach supervisor. And she once said to me, Gemma, think about what you're not hearing when you're making those notes. And again, I became someone that took copious notes to someone that just learned to write 1 or 2 words just to reference and remember to go back to something, but not to feel the need to make copious notes. Because if you're making notes, you're not listening.
Yeah, so there you go. So I was taught 2 ears, 1 mouth. That suggests you should spend twice the amount of time listening to speaking. And you've also got the 80-20 rule. And then again, I remember an estate agency owner having a conversation with me. He went into an appraisal and he said to the potential seller, would you mind if I record myself on the market appraisal, because I like to go back and share it with my colleagues and do some training with them. And when he got back, he was horrified to hear he had spoken 80% of the time and just listened 20% of the time. And he said, this is not how you do it. You want to be listening 80% of the time and talking 20% of the time.
Yeah, again, 100% agree on that.
So that was a really interesting learning. And again, maybe what I would suggest to people is do that. He says writing copious notes down as you speak and trying to listen at the same time. So
it's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. Brilliant. Well, look, so I want to just end on a couple of things, if that's okay with you, because I'm conscious of the time and I'm very grateful of your time. So thank you. We started with a Women in Estate Agency conference, which I thought was an absolutely exceptional event. What were your key takeaways from that, please?
That was amazing. I think one, just the talent in the room, how many amazing women there are in this industry. I was just blown away. And some, great men that came along too. I loved, and you participated in this, I loved the wellbeing focused panel. I thought there were some really, really important messages there about grief, about anxiety. I think it's really important that we talk about the menopause. And I think beyond that, female hormones and, the kind of what women go through and kind of how we should be aware of that. So I thought that was brilliant. The Susie Lampley Trust. I loved Lucy Noonan, my namesake. I loved,
Are you related?
Present. We're not related. We are not related, but it's always lovely to see her. And I thought it was great hearing about her journey so far with her business. So yeah, some brilliant takeaways. And actually, I feel like I'm a bit obsessed with Moneypenny now as well. Been looking at their offices online and kind of learning more about how they do things. So that was great as well, to be kind of introduced to them as an organisation.
Yeah, Jo Swash is unbelievable lady.
Yeah.
And the stories that she shared were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Sitting in front of a prime minister and telling them to shut up.
Wow.
and listen to her. So very, very powerful. So
Yeah, amazing.
if you're not following Jo, have a look at Jo Swash.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's
lady.
Impressive lady, very impressive lady. So final question for you. I know you're a reader, so books. Okay? Books. Any suggestions for people? Best book you've read and why? I'm going to ask you the why question now.
So my favourite set of business books are the Patrick Lencioni books. So if you haven't heard of Patrick Lencioni, you might have heard of the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he's written a lot of books, and I was very lucky. I was invited to go and watch him speak in Finland a few years ago, and he's an amazing speaker as well. So you can watch his videos. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is about what not to do in a team, and is absolutely brilliant, and it gives you a model for getting teams to open up, be vulnerable with each other, and work together as a unit. And I've used that in training and had some amazing experiences with teams. I worked with a team who had been working together. They'd known each other in the engineering world for about 20 plus years, and one of the guys came out of the training and said, I know more about my colleagues on the basis of today than I have for 24 years of working with them. Wow, that's very powerful. And I can't take the credit for that. That is on the basis of Patrick Lencioni and his training methods. So yeah, the great thing about Patrick Lencioni's books, and there's one called The Motive, which is about being a CEO and being really clear on kind of why, what your role is, and why, what you're there to do and what you're not there to do. He writes them as like stories. So he writes them around fictional teams and fictional people. So it's like reading a novel. And I love that, because I love reading novels, and I'd rather read a novel than a business book. So yeah, if that kind of appeals to you, I would recommend anything by Patrick Lencioni. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. You've been a wonderful guest. You shared so much. I love why. So, that's going to be a really good question, and about being an active listener. So thank you. You shared loads and loads of gold. I'm sure everybody watching, thank you all for watching. Appreciates it. Thank you for listening. How do people get hold of you, Gemma, please? So my email is gemma.noonan@thegigsgroup.com. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. Gemma Noonan. So yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, thanks very much for watching. Thank you for listening. Future guests lined up are Deborah Franklin, Cheryl Thompson, Kirsty Franks, Bob Berg and John Mann, who've written the Go Giver book. So please look out for those. And thank you very much, and have an excellent afternoon, morning, evening, whenever you're watching or listening. So thank you all, and thank you, Gemma, for being a wonderful guest. Really appreciate it. Bye, everybody.